Is there anything nice you can say about Donald Trump?
Uh, I mean, at this point, I don't really want to. I think that he has demonstrated himself unfit. I mean, I think that Kamala, when she said it, I think the DNC speech, that he's an unserious man who's a serious risk. That's true. We've had on the podcast Mary Trump, his niece. She knows him. She's family with him, and she has nothing good to say about him, as far as I know. Um, I can't even necessarily say he loves his kids, that he's a good family man, because it's a transactional relationship. And you can see that in the way Ivanka Trump has been out of the picture. I think she was there on January 6th and knows what is coming. So she's out. Um, I don't think there's any need to say anything good about him. Hello and welcome to Eric McElroy's American Exchange with me, Eric McElroy, once again. Well, this is it. This is our last podcast being recorded and put out before the November 2024 election, otherwise known as the last election America will ever have, if you believe in any of the news coverage that's happened so far. I'm very excited this week to be joined by our producer, Mark Machado. It's him and I talking about my trip to the States, catching up on predictions, and that's what I make in here is my prediction for what will happen. Although if you are following me on Twitter or Threads or on Facebook, I've already made that prediction, but still listen, because here I explain exactly what I'm thinking. And we just talk about my visit to the States, what I saw is the mood of what was happening in America, how that's being viewed from here in the UK, and what's going to happen in the next week or so post-election, as well as what's going to happen on election day. So thanks very much for listening. Make sure to like, subscribe, and do all those things you need to do. Here is me and producer Mark. Oh, and by the way, if you're one of those YouTube viewers, make sure this is the chance to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate that. It's been growing quite nicely. It's starting to build a little bit. So join us on the YouTube. I'm very excited to welcome to the show the producer of the show, Mark. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm all right. This is a little bit of a different thing. Normally, I'm dialing across the pond to find out what's happening in America. But of course, I've just been across the pond and I have now come back here, possibly as an asylum seeker, depending on what happens in the next few days. And so I'm throwing myself into the embrace of you, the British people. Mark, will you accept me?
No. Um,
You've been following Trump, haven't you?
yes, yeah, and that's why well, I think it's imperative that the right person wins so that we can send you back to a safe country.
You know what? That's worth it. If that's what it takes.
Yeah.
I'll sacrifice my identity here as a British citizen just to save democracy around the world. Yeah, how are you enjoying the election as someone who is technically not impacted by it, but no, you will be impacted by it because everyone is impacted by what happens in America.
So what I don't understand is why more people in America don't have Trump fatigue. Uh,
Mm,
because in kind of real terms, it feel we've basically had a decade in US
yeah.
politics now. We've had a decade of Trump campaigning, right? Because it was about 10 years ago when he decided when kind of the whispers started to emerge that he might run. And then I actually remember watching clips of um, do you remember Fox News in what would have been the 20 like New Year's Eve 2015 when they went to him and his family
Mm,
in Trump Tower in New York and asked them how they celebrate it. I remember watching all that stuff and thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to be quite an entertaining sideshow the course of this year. Obviously, how wrong I was, how wrong
yep.
we were. And I just don't understand from a kind of political perspective how Americans, US citizens, aren't bored of this show.
Well, I think that, I mean, if you watch, because I watch the Trump rallies, or at least half watch them, and it even feels like they're kind of bored of the Trump show. He's This weekend, he's done like 4 rallies a day, and he's doing four. So we're recording this on Monday, day before the election. And, he seems tired. And I was just tuned into the North Carolina rally, and you know how they always have the people behind him at the beginning. I was kind of skimming through it because it started a while ago. And at the beginning, they're all standing there with their little Trump signs. And then I kind of went through towards the end, and they're all sitting down. And one woman just has her head down like this. And you can see people are on their phones, like talking to each other. Like It's still going. I know. Are you gonna miss? You're gonna miss the last bus, aren't you? Yeah, I think I am. Because I think having so I was just back in the States and trying to get not to get a sense of it, like because the fantastic sponsorship of our viewers and listeners paid for me to go there. It was a wedding, so I had to go back. Um, but
And now you're
and
married.
but yeah, exactly. Gonna get my green card finally. So we went to our niece's wedding, and so we were in two states: New York, which is a traditional Republican safe seat, or Democratic safe seat, and then into Pennsylvania, which is the mother of all swing states. The election will be decided by our relatives in Pennsylvania, and people are scared. People don't want to talk about politics. So at the wedding, obviously, you're not supposed to talk about politics at a wedding, and I haven't been in the US right before an election for a long time, but no one wanted to talk about it. And I would try and kind of like slide it into the conversation. And unless you were fully on board with well, mostly with the Democratic side, because most of our family are fairly liberal, but there were people there, cousins from Florida, cousins from other parts of the country, and they didn't want to go there. I also went to some comedy clubs in New York because comedy is also my thing, and I was shocked by how little the comedians even touched on politics at all. And those who did it with such a light touch as not to offend anyone in the audience either way. And this is in New York, allegedly the most socialist liberal capital of the universe, and the comics were afraid to go there. Now, the audiences at those clubs are mostly tourists from out of town, so you could tell they didn't want to offend. People are exhausted. They are tired of it. They're afraid to talk about it. Um, and and I think that's why it's going to lead to a break in this late stage towards Kamala, because she's a legacy from the Biden administration, but she isn't a 78 or 79-year-old man. She isn't taking you back to the Trump era. She isn't this insult politician and all of these things. She's managed, I think, to divorce herself from the current administration and become the candidate of change because Trump makes himself the center of fucking everything. And that's exhausting. So I think that when people are in that voting booth who haven't voted yet, I have an instinct that says to me they're going to Americans tend to vote for a candidate who's more likable. They tend to vote for someone who gives them a little bit of hope. And I know that seems strange, but in 2016, that was Trump. I think the break, and there's some polls that are backing me up on this. The break is going to be towards late people voting for Kamala
What
because,
was you were in Pennsylvania? Obviously,
yeah,
that's you said it's the mother of all swing states. What was your feeling in Pennsylvania? Because I keep seeing polls, and obviously, I spend a lot of time on Twitter, so Mr. Musk has
yeah,
must
changed things.
change my what I think might be happening.
Yeah. Well, we were in Philadelphia, which is a very liberal city, but there were Trump signs. There were a few Trump signs. My other in-laws are out on Long Island, New York, which is kind of a little bit Kentish, a little Essexy for those of us in the UK. So there were the Trump trucks with the flags, and there were Trump, there was a huge sign, "In Trump We Trust." I think I tweeted you or I messaged you that picture. There was more Trump support out in Long Island in New York, which will go for Kamala, than there was in Philadelphia. But that Philadelphia is also a very blue city, but there were still Trump signs. But it was mostly Kamala signs. But still, people just didn't want to talk about it. I tried to kind of get taxi drivers to talk about it, weren't interested. Try to get into the conversation, what it's been like with the conventions there, when the candidates come to town. People would change the subject. So I think people are scared. Now that what might be happening, and if she wins, and the polls have showed it as 50-50, if she wins by more than that little narrow margin, that's going to be because people have become shy Kamala voters. So in 2016 and 2020, there was a lot of this rumored shy Trump voter. People didn't want to tell pollsters they were going to vote for Trump. I think the narrative has changed, and people don't want to say who they're going to vote for at all. And there's been a real push to message to women and even to men that your vote is secret and you don't have to say who you're voting for. And with one of the biggest issues on the ballot is women's bodily autonomy and abortion, that there's a thought that women are going to break towards Kamala at the end and not tell their spouses that they're voting in secret because they don't want to have issues at home. And we saw this with a poll that came out of Iowa, where the Republicans have won Iowa since 2016. And this is a very reliable pollster who's known for getting it close to right almost every time. And as a surprise, Kamala's could possibly win the state of Iowa. That's not one of the swing states. And that's one of those places where if she does get that, it's only 6 electoral votes, but it would demonstrate a trend towards her that the rest of the polls aren't showing, because people are either breaking late towards Kamala or they become shy Kamala voters.
I, I I don't want to ask you how that makes you feel because I think at the moment there's too much kind of speculation on what you're saying about who could win, right? I think we're going to ask that question once we know who the next president's going to be. Um, what's it like though? Because I remember when I was a kid in the UK, in fact, until I basically don't know how my parents vote. Like to
Mm,
this day, I don't know how they vote.
yeah,
Um, and I remember as a child being told, oh, in America, everyone tells you how they vote, but in the UK, no one ever talks about it. But it feels to me like maybe that's kind of flipped.
yeah,
And how does
definitely.
that make you feel? That change in people not wanting to talk about politics openly, how does that make you feel?
I mean, it's scary. I mean, I think I know there are people who I know in the States who are like, I've got my lifelong friends that I've known since high school, and one of them's gone Trumpy, and I don't really want to talk to him anymore. It's that divisive that people are struggling to relate to each other. Now, I have family members who I know are voting for Trump, or I strongly assume they're voting for Trump. I don't want to not talk to them anymore. I've been doing my best more than I ever have to put my own voice out there to try and engage with them, to try and talk to them, um, and do that kind of outreach to the point where I'm sure my Facebook feed has been muted by a lot of people, where I tend not to do that. As much as I'm into politics, I like to keep it. I like to talk to you and to strangers, but I don't want to engage with my own family because I don't want that strife at home. But this has been, I feel like this is so important, this election, that I had to engage and do what I could to try and bring anybody over. And so I've done more advocacy than I ever have for a political candidate. Um, and if she loses, I know it will be my fault.
Yeah, that's
And
and
that's
I hope if she does lose and when she does her speech, she
she
mentions you and
call
blames
me
you.
out. I just
Yeah,
hope she mentions the podcast by name. Do you think that's possible?
maybe
That'd be incredible sponsorship.
that. Well, if she's lost, maybe not. Like,
I
uh,
mean, hey, Trump, good, no news is bad news. If he wins this, in spite of being a felon, liable for sexual assault, and one judge said rape, bankrupt more times than you can count, liable for fraud for his company, an insurrectionist, and even his own chief of staff calls him a fascist. If he still wins, then the American democracy is broken.
yeah,
I mean,
it's dead. It's
you
done.
can't,
It's kind of done, right? Like
yeah.
because America stands for nothing at that
I mean,
point.
I'm not a Republican by any stretch of the imagination, but I have said before, and I will say again, I would vote for Bush, any of the Bushes, the Romneys, the McCains, any of those people, because they were at least patriots. Now, were they corrupt? Yeah. Were they not politicians I would support on the policies? Yeah. But they weren't, openly supporting, Putin in a war in Ukraine. They weren't saying how they admire, the way that Chinese President Xi controls his people and hasn't promised to be a dictator on day one. So I
Is
know
is
he said one day, but how many dictators do you know that just do it for a day?
is there anything nice you can say about Donald Trump?
Uh, I mean, at this point, I don't really want to. I think that he has demonstrated himself unfit. I mean, I think that Kamala, when she said it, I think the DNC speech, that he's an unserious man who's a serious risk. That's true. We've had on the podcast Mary Trump, his niece. She knows him. She's family with him, and she has nothing good to say about him, as far as I know. Um, so I can't even necessarily say he loves his kids, that he's a good family man, because it's a transactional relationship, and you can see that in the way Ivanka Trump has been out of the picture. I think she was there on January 6th and knows what is coming, so she's out. Um, I don't think there's any need to say anything good about him at this stage, which I know makes me what is it, Trump delusion syndrome or whatever it is, but he's, yeah. Now, his supporters, on one hand, you've got different groups of people that are there. Some, I think, who have been duped, partly because of the pervasiveness of Fox News and other right-wing media outlets. Sinclair doesn't get talked about, which controls a lot of the local TV stations in America. They're just as right-wing as Fox, but more insidious because you don't see it quite as clearly. Um, and I was trying to find who said this, but I just heard it for the first time, um, said by somebody that democracies tend to die from within.
Yeah.
Democracies don't fail because of other countries taking them over. They fail internally. And that's what's happening. So these people are not patriots. They don't care about anything but themselves. And yeah, what little respect mine is worth, they don't deserve it.
I think we should leave it there. I think there's only one question left for me to ask. What is your prediction of the election?
I have already tweeted this. I think the best case scenario, because there's a guy named Christopher Busey, who he is way out there, and he's a data analyst, and he has predicted that not only is Kamala going to win, but that she is going to win Iowa, which just had that surprise poll. He has predicted that she'll win Florida, which has not been won by Democrats since Obama, and he's predicted a full swing of all the blue wall states, everything to go. So he's put it at over a 300 electoral vote victory for Kamala. That is the high bar. That's my high bar. The minimum bar is that she'll just hold the blue wall, the northern Midwestern states, and she'll get a couple of the states that Biden had last time, and she'll eke by with 276 electoral votes. But I think either way, it is definitely Kamala's to lose this stage. I just think that late breaking vote towards her is going to be there. The women coming out for her is going to be there. There's never been a coalition put together that ranges from Dick and Liz Cheney, who are the Darth Vaders of American politics, to Bernie Sanders, who is the Karl Marx of American politics. Imagine Margaret Thatcher, if she was still alive, teaming up with Jeremy Corbyn to support a candidate. That's what we're talking about here. So it's never happened. So all of this come together. If that fails, that is either because the media is so broken in America and because misogyny and racism is still king. Now, and as a middle-aged white guy, I should be voting for that, I suppose. But I just can't. My career would probably go better. Maybe we should, if he wins, Mark, should we change the direction of the pod, do you think?
Yeah,
Is there a space
100%.
for us?
Just follow
I
the money,
think,
right? Follow the money.
and
Follow
in
the
six
money.
months, I could be on Joe Rogan.
Exactly.
That's a good plan. But the other thing, and
Talking nonsense about Tucker Carlson, right?
yeah, the final thing is, I think the big concern, and I'm hearing this from people who are talking to the people in the Kamala campaign, is that she will win. That feels the trend. His line is coming, and even if you hear about news coming out of the Trump campaign as well, but he is going to come out at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the United States, say stop the counting, I have won, and and declare victory, and then the House of Representatives, which is controlled by the Republicans, is going to call a special session, and they're going to try and rush through the congressional proceedings to crown Trump president. That's the fear, and that's what we have to watch out for in the weeks to come.
Do you think the House of Representatives would do that?
I think that there are a majority of the Republicans in the House of Representatives who would like to do that, and they have a majority of only about 4 seats, I think. And it just depends on if there's a few brave men and women in that group who will refuse to go along with a coup to take over the United States.
Wow.
Good times.
Jeez.
Good times.
What a place to end this.
So good news, I think she'll win. Bad news, Trump will just take over anyway.
Oof.
I don't think I should have myself on as a guest anymore because it's too dark.
Oh, grim.
So
I don't really know what you want me to say there, Eric.
something hopeful that you've heard. Have you heard of rumors of? I haven't kept up on what's happening in the UK because I was in the States, but I've heard the Labour government's going really well.
it's it's chugging along. Like, I mean, there's governments getting fiscal policy wrong to having whole coups. So I don't really. It's not really
It's not
comparable,
quite
is
the
it?
same. Don't worry,
Yeah.
we'll get there. It's coming.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
So there you have it. Thank you very much to Mark for coming on and being my guest, or kind of interviewing me, I suppose. A little bit of a reversal of fortunes. This is the last one we're recording before we start to get results, and we'll have another episode out either probably the end of this week or the beginning of next, with hopefully some sense of what is happening. It's going to be an interesting week, that's for sure. Fingers crossed that things go well. Fingers crossed that that Trump is more bluster than he says when he declares victory, whether he wins or not. And yeah, and I will eat crow if I am wrong, and I will also be crying as I eat that crow. So that will be not ideal. But thank you very much for watching. Thanks to Mark for putting everything together and for coming on and being the guest this week. And we will be back soon. But in the meantime, like, subscribe, review, do all those things. And thank you very much. Bye-bye.